Hi there, I'm Rachel Oseland with the Austin Post.
And I'm Gavin Stone with Fanboy TV, and we're here with the director of Getting Back to Abnormal, Louis or Louis?
Louis.
Louis, okay. So let's tell everyone just a little bit about what is Getting Back to Abnormal.
Okay, Getting Back to Abnormal is a film about New Orleans, which is kind of Austin's cousin in weird. You know, it's a really unique culture that is very insular and proud of itself, and it's got endless amounts of cool things, and people there think differently. And we wanted to make a film that was kind of from the perspective of New Orleanians.
Yeah.
And we happened to be lucky. We found a bunch of great characters doing a political race, and people watch it, and it's got a lot of kind of racial content, and people think they know where people are coming from. And as the movie progresses, you kind of have a lot of your expectations upended, which is a real New Orleans thing to have happen. You think you understand it, and then you hang around a little bit, and you go, oh no, I don't get this place at all, but I really like it.
We were talking before we came on camera about the fact that New Orleans is one of the few cities in the United States left that has a really strong independent culture. It's just not like other cities.
Yeah, that is so true. And what's great about New Orleans, it's been like that for like 250 years.
Yeah, it's always been kind of the Republic of New Orleans all by itself.
There's a guy who, we interviewed like a long time ago, and he said, if Daniel Boone had gone south instead of west, he would have discovered French opera. I mean, New Orleans has been around for hundreds of years, way before, when Washington, D.C. was just a place in the swamp, you know? And it has this amazing food and this music, and it's got this racial blending, and it's great. It's just a great place. And I fell in love with it when I lived there a long time ago, and I always wanted to make a movie in the recent years since Katrina, and that's what Getting Back to Abnormal is.
So what inspired you to pick now to go back to New Orleans to make this particular movie?
Well, there was this thing called Hurricane Katrina.
I've heard about that one, yeah.
Really? And so did about 20,000 independent filmmakers.
Oh.
And they all went back and made movies about Katrina. They made Katrina victims, pets lost in Katrina.
Really?
People. But
no,
great. I'm not.
Katrina would have done brilliantly.
It was a wonderful film. Okay, so I mean,
kind.
But the point is, there was like every possible aspect. Reality show set in New Orleans. Christian build a house show. In 13 parts from Canada set in New Orleans. It was like everybody was doing it, and we said. And we knew New Orleans because there's four of us, and we all lived there. And we said we're just going to wait. Okay, we got it. This has to burn itself out. And finally, people got tired of New Orleans movies, and that's when we said, let's do a post Katrina movie.
Okay.
And that's why it's Getting Back to Abnormal. It's not about getting back to normal. There is a good film called Getting Back to Normal about New Orleans, but we're getting back to abnormal because that's really its natural state.
So how did you find, what is her name?
Stacy Head.
Stacy Head. How did you find her, decide to follow her around?
Stacy Head is one of the stars of our film, and she is a white city councilwoman who is actually quite capable, but kind of has a chip in her head where she doesn't edit herself, and she tends to say things. She's basically loose-lipped, doesn't say stuff, and it comes out in a divisive way. And when we came down, she was in the middle of a huge spat with some black political folks about whether she was a racist or not. And actually, I believe, for a white person, she's actually not racist. I mean, you can't.
For a white person, she's not racist at all.
No white person could say, "Well, I'm not a racist," But in fact, she's actually pretty progressive. I think folks in Austin would probably feel pretty good about a lot of her policies, at least some of the more conservative, crazies, right? But she was in the middle of this storm, and she was very vulnerable, but she was willing to let us in. And documentary filmmakers will tell you, if you have access, that's gold, because that's what people want to see, And so we went with her, and that was good enough because she's a great character, and she just spoke her mind, unlike most politicians. And then it turns out she has a political advisor who's black, named Barbara Layson Keller. And Barbara Layson Keller is like one of the greatest documentary characters I've ever come across in my career. She's just one of those people who grabs people and she sucks them in with her personality. She told everybody the film was all about her, and it was great. It was great. And between the two of them, it's kind of one's tall white, one's short black, and they had a great, it's a great human story, and it's a lot of fun.
When you're going around Louisiana and showing how things are getting back to abnormal.
Right.
Did you have a hard time leaving things on the cutting room floor? Because there's so much to show.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's always, the other thing documentary filmmakers, 101 is you have to kill your babies.
Yeah.
And I've been around long enough to know that there's stuff you just fall in love with, but it's just it sticks out like a sore thumb, or it gives people the wrong idea, or it doesn't really pan out, and just because you like this one little moment, it's got to go. So
can you give us some examples of that? Because you really should see the movie. It's fantastic. So for people that have seen it, a little behind the scenes of like what wasn't able to make it
Okay,
in.
well, for example, we had a great coup because when we started filming, which was a couple years ago, David Simon, creator of The Wire, one of the most beloved long-form HBO series, was developing a new series called Treme. Okay, and we said, can we film David and his writers in the writing room in the process of thinking about Treme?
That's awesome.
It was awesome. Okay, and the way David Simon runs these rooms is like, it isn't like a bunch of people trying to one-up each other. It's a bunch of equals. I mean, he's the boss, but basically they're equals, and they just were shooting around ideas, and so that was really, really privileged. It was just great stuff, and they're talking about characters, and some people you may remember the first season, John Goodman played a character, and they're trying to give the guy a backstory about how he wrote a novel, and then the second novel wasn't very successful, and he went to New Orleans, and he got sucked into the New Orleans morass, and so they were forgetting about him in New York, and it was going to be bad. He was going to be depressed. They built this whole thing, none of which comes through in the actual series, but it's just great to hear smart people talk about it. So that was really hard. We had a whole Treme section. We went on set. We interviewed Clark Peters, who plays the Mardi Gras Indian chief. It was really great, really cool. All gone. Actually, there's tiny little bit in there that you wouldn't even know. And David Simon gave us a fantastic interview, which is in the movie, and has my favorite line, which is, New Orleans, they put the fun in funeral.
So what would you say, I mean, there's a lot of stereotypes about New Orleans, and what would you say that people coming to this movie that have mostly seen the other post-Katrina movies are going to look at it and go, oh wait, that's not really what I would have expected?
Well, I think the most important thing is that there was a narrative after Katrina, and people like Anderson Cooper were sort of people who really promoted this, that New Orleanians were victims. They were victims of an unfeeling federal government for the most part, and there is truth in that, but really it's much more complicated. And New Orleans is also, David Simon has also said this, the co-author of its misery to a certain degree, and everybody in New Orleans knows that. They go, we screw up. We don't take stuff seriously. They have a long history of corrupt politicians, and guess what? They had a corrupt mayor at the time Katrina hit, and he was not up to the task, and the city really suffered. So it's this joy and calamity that coexist in New Orleans that people who live there kind of appreciate and love, and sort of hate themselves for loving it. And that's what we tried to capture in the movie. You'll see a bunch of people fighting for their little piece of turf. It's like tribal, and I think that makes some viewers go, well, gee, I really want to root for character A or character B, and you find out, well, they're all kind of like out for themselves.
Well, what do you think has allowed New Orleans to hold on to so much of that independent culture when the rest of the country's like, you know what, we're just going to homogenize as much as we can. We need a strip mall with a McDonald's and a Starbucks.
Have you eaten New Orleans food?
That's a good reason.
Have you listened to New Orleans music?
And the architecture.
And have you been to Mardi Gras and all those things? And those things don't go away.
So many other cities have had a past like that just kind of got crushed down and ground into like the rubble of.
There's just some magic there, It really is, and people, I mean, what happens is what happened to me. I grew up in Wisconsin, which is an interesting place, and it's got some weirdnesses. But I went down to New Orleans, and it was February, and it was beautiful weather, and I just fell in love with the place and didn't leave for 10 years. And that happens to people, and what happens is waves of people come down and go, oh my God, I never realized such a place in America could exist, and they stay there. And I have friends who've moved down there, 20 years after I lived there, and they had the exact same experience,
So were you at all hesitant to include a political aspect into this movie, especially with the political climate that we're in?
Well, I actually have made a lot of films about politics and about elections, and my films tend to be very funny, and I want to assure people that this is a funny movie too, and I hope you'll
you should totally see it.
It's funny, but there's some poignant stuff. No, and what's interesting about New Orleans is that whole kind of like left, right, red, blue, irrelevant in New Orleans. It's about what do I get, what do you get? Okay, you know what? Your family and my family have been feuding for 3 generations, and your political connections just got a garbage contract, so I hate you. I'm going to work against you. That's really all it is. Everybody wants to know. Oh, is Stacy the main character? Is Stacy a Republican or is she a Democrat? She looks like Sarah Palin. Is she Sarah Palin? No, it doesn't. She's actually a progressive Democrat. Does not matter in New Orleans. They don't care. They used to say they don't even know who their senator is because he's in Washington, or she's in Washington. It's all about local. It's about who's your council person. That's what we have, a council race, but it's actually much more important in the life of the city than who's governor or something like that.
Which is also neat in its own respect, the idea that something local would be that much more important. Well, thank you so much for making it out. I really appreciate you making the time.
My pleasure.
I hope you have a great time at South by Southwest, and you do other things as well, which is a video game. What is the website to the video game?
We have a couple years ago we got some money and developed a video game which is a virtual world called Past Present, and you can step back 100 years and either be a mill manager or a mill worker in a mill that's going to go on
Who
strike.
wants to be a mill worker? I mean, if I want to be a manager, I'm going that route.
Well, actually, the whole thing is you're a mill manager, and your wife wants you to buy the latest technology, which is a Victrola, which is like a huge chunk of your salary.
So is it a kind of steampunky game?
It's a little bit like that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's meant to be actually taught in schools, although regular people can play it too. But it's really meant to make history come alive for some seventh grader who could not care less about reading a textbook. And we've been really pleased about that. It's pastpresent.org, and it's free, and it's pretty cool.
Free is always the key word. So thanks for coming out, and have a great time at South by Southwest, dude.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, and it's a great interview. Thank you.
Thank you.